1 year later, Marcus stood at the podium in the police academy's graduation hall, looking out at a sea of fresh faces in blue uniforms. In the front row, Sophie sat beaming, now fully recovered and wearing a Future Tech CEO t-shirt that made him smile every time he caught sight of it. Beside her sat officers Peterson and Reynolds, or rather, training officers Peterson and Reynolds, as they were now known. When I was forced to do push-ups on a frozen sidewalk last year, Marcus began, his voice carrying through the packed auditorium. I had two choices. I could seek revenge or I could pursue change. The easy path would have been to destroy careers and walk away. The harder path, he gestured to the graduating class before him, was to transform a moment of humiliation into a movement for reform. The screens behind him displayed statistics. Civilian complaints down 63% across departments using Tech France accountability systems. Unnecessary force incidents reduced by 71%. Community trust ratings up by 58%. But it wasn't the numbers that made Marcus proud. It was the stories. Last month, he continued, a young officer in Seattle was about to make the same mistakes that officers Peterson and Reynolds made with me. But because of our new systems, because of the training you've all just completed, she stopped herself. She took a breath. She remembered the lessons you've learned here. And instead of escalating the situation, she turned it into an opportunity for understanding. Peterson and Reynolds nodded from their seats, their expressions reflective. They'd spent the past year traveling to police departments across the country, sharing their story, teaching others how easy it was to lose your way, and how important it was to find it again. But the real victory, Marcus's voice softened as he looked at Sophie, isn't in the statistics or the systems. It's in the lessons we pass on to the next generation. He pulled out a familiar piece of paper, Peterson's original letter of apology, now framed in his office. It's in learning that true strength isn't about power over others, but about the power to change ourselves. Sophie stood up, right on cue, joining her father at the podium. Together, they unveiled Tech France's latest initiative, the Claire Chen Memorial Foundation, named after Marcus's late wife, dedicated to building bridges between law enforcement and communities. My wife used to say that the measure of justice isn't in how hard you can punch back, Marcus shared, his hand on Sophie's shoulder, but in how many people you can lift up. Today, as I look at this graduating class, I see her vision coming to life. The ceremony concluded with something unprecedented. Peterson and Reynolds pinning badges on the new officers, each pin accompanied by a personal reminder of their own journey from darkness to redemption. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present. After the ceremony, as the hall emptied, Marcus found himself standing in the exact spot where he'd done those push-ups a year ago. The sidewalk had been replaced with a small garden, the first of many reflection spaces being installed at police departments nationwide. "Dad," Sophie called, joining him with Peterson and Reynolds in tow, ready for the community dinner. Marcus looked at the two men who had once humiliated him, now valued partners in reform. "Remember what you said that night?" he asked them. Amazing what technology can find. Turns out, it found something none of us expected, a way forward. As they walked to their cars, a young patrol officer stopped them. "Mr. Chen, I just wanted to say, your story changed how I think about the badge. It's not about power anymore. It's about responsibility." Sophie squeezed her father's hand, just like her mother used to do. Above them, the Minneapolis sky was clear and bright. No snow, no darkness, just the promise of a new day and the knowledge that sometimes the coldest nights can lead to the warmest changes. "Come on," Marcus said to the group. "We've got more work to do. Because the real victory isn't in changing a few officers or one department. It's in changing the entire conversation about what justice really means." The dashboard clock blinked 2:17 a.m. as Marcus Chen massaged his temples, trying to ward off the headache that had been building since midnight. Outside his Tesla Model S, the winter wind howled across empty Minneapolis streets, carrying snowflakes that danced in the glow of sporadic streetlights. The temperature display showed a brutal -15 degrees, the coldest night of the year. His phone buzzed again, the seventh time in the past hour. Each vibration sent a jolt of anxiety through his chest, but hospital policy prevented him from checking messages while driving. His 13-year-old daughter, Sophie, had been admitted 3 days ago with a rare autoimmune condition, and tonight's fever spike had kept him at her bedside far longer than planned. "Just 10 more minutes," Marcus muttered, his voice hoarse from the endless hours of reassuring both Sophie and himself that everything would be okay. He needed to get home, shower, change, and return before her next round of treatment at 6 a.m. The empty streets made the drive easier, but the exhaustion pulling at his eyelids reminded him to stay focused. The flash of red and blue lights in his rearview mirror shattered his concentration. Marcus checked his speedometer, 27 in a 30 zone. He'd been deliberately driving under the limit due to the icy conditions. With a tired sigh, he guided his car to the curb, the crunch of snow under his tires oddly loud in the dead of night. His phone buzzed again, more urgently this time, it seemed. 2 doors slammed behind him, and Marcus squinted as twin beams of flashlights targeted his side mirrors, deliberately angled to reflect into his eyes. He lowered his window, and bitter cold rushed in, stealing his breath. The officers approached from both sides of his car, their boots crunching slowly through the fresh snow. Too slowly, as if they were savoring the moment. "License and registration," the officer on his left barked, not even bothering with a greeting. His nameplate read Peterson, and his breath smelled strongly of coffee and cigarettes. The other officer, Reynolds, stood silently by the passenger window, his flashlight beam unwavering. Marcus reached for his documents with trembling fingers. From cold or worry, he wasn't sure. "Officers, I apologize if there's an issue, but I've been very careful about my speed tonight. I'm actually coming from the hospital where my daughter—" "Did we ask where you were coming from?" Peterson cut him off, snatching the license from Marcus's hand. "Pretty nice car for this neighborhood. What brings someone from—" He squinted at the license. "Eden Prairie, all the way out here at this hour?" Before Marcus could respond, his phone buzzed yet again. The screen lit up on the passenger seat, catching Officer Reynolds' attention. Marcus could see the hospital's number clearly displayed. "Step out of the vehicle," Peterson commanded, his tone carrying an edge that made Marcus's skin prickle. "And not from the cold." "Officer, please, that's the hospital calling. My daughter." "I said step out of the vehicle. Now." Peterson's hand moved to rest on his holster, an unnecessary gesture that sent a clear message. Marcus's jaw clenched, but he complied, his designer dress shoes crunching into the snow as he emerged. The wind cut through his thin blazer like a knife. Above them, the streetlight flickered, casting strange shadows on the fresh powder that had begun to dust his car's pristine black finish. His phone fell silent, the missed call notification joining the others. In the distance, a lonely ambulance siren wailed, and Marcus prayed it wasn't heading towards Sophie's wing of the hospital. Little did he know, his night was about to get much worse. But so was Officers Peterson and Reynolds' careers. The sound of tires crunching on snow broke the tense silence. A black SUV pulled up alongside Marcus's Tesla, its window rolling down to reveal City Council member Sarah Martinez, her expression shifting from confusion to shock as she took in the scene before her. Marcus Chen?" She stepped out of her vehicle, wrapping her coat tightly against the brutal cold. "I just left the hospital. Sophie's nurse said you weren't answering." Her voice trailed off as she noticed his soaked pants, the snow-covered blazer, and the officer's phone still pointed at the scene. Peterson fumbled to pocket his phone, nearly dropping it in the snow. "Councilwoman Martinez, we were just—" "Just what, Officer Peterson?" Sarah's voice cut through the night air like a blade. As head of the Police Oversight Committee, she'd spent enough time in precincts to recognize misconduct when she saw it. "Were you making Mr. Chen do exercises in sub-zero temperatures while his daughter's in intensive care?" Reynolds stepped forward, desperation creeping into his voice. "Ma'am, we had no idea who he was. There have been several incidents in this area, and—" "So you physically harass everyone you pull over?" Marcus interjected quietly, brushing ice from his sleeves. or just the ones driving nice cars through questionable neighborhoods? He pulled out his phone, finally able to check the hospital messages. His hands shook as he read them, though no longer from the cold. Sarah moved closer to Marcus, her heels crunching in the snow. "Your body cameras are on, I assume." The officers exchanged panicked glances. "I see. Well, fortunately, I'm sure Mr. Chen's vehicle has excellent surveillance systems. Tech Front Solutions is known for that, aren't they?" The color drained from Peterson's face as realization set in. Not only had they harassed the CEO of the company, modernizing their department's entire technological infrastructure, but they'd done it in front of the one person who could fast-track their termination. "Marcus." Sarah touched his arm gently. "Sophie's fever peaked about 20 minutes ago. They've stabilized her, but she's asking for you." Marcus nodded, his expression unreadable. He turned to the officers, who seemed to have shrunk in their uniforms. "I'll see you both tomorrow at the precinct. The technology implementation meeting. I believe you're both required to attend." His voice carried no anger, which somehow made it more terrifying. "We'll have plenty to discuss." "Sir, please," Peterson started, but Marcus was already opening his car door. "Oh, and officers." He paused, looking back at them. "Don't bother deleting those videos from your phones. They've already been uploaded to your cloud storage, a feature of the new system we're implementing. Automatic backup, impossible to override. Amazing what technology can do these days." Sarah watched the officers' faces crumple as Marcus started his car. "I'll follow you to the hospital," she called out, then turned to the officers. "As for you two, I suggest you spend the rest of your shift reading the department's policy on civil rights and proper conduct. You'll need it for tomorrow's meeting." As Marcus pulled away, he caught a final glimpse of Peterson and Reynolds in his rearview mirror. They stood motionless in the falling snow, their flashlight beams pointed at the ground where he'd done push-ups minutes earlier. The heat from his car's vents finally began to warm his frozen hands, but his mind was already racing ahead to tomorrow. He'd been planning to revolutionize the police department's technology. Now he would revolutionize its culture too. His phone buzzed again. Another hospital update. This time, he could answer it. "I'm on my way, Sophie," he whispered, pressing the accelerator. "Daddy's got one more important meeting tomorrow. Then all yours." The afternoon sun streamed through the hospital window as Marcus sat beside Sophie, reading aloud the flood of news headlines on his tablet. "Police Department announces sweeping reforms," he quoted, then scrolled to another. "Tech CEO transforms night of harassment into catalyst for change." "Dad," Sophie interrupted, her color much improved from the night before. "Are those officers going to lose their jobs?" Marcus set down his tablet, considering his daughter's question. In the hallway outside her room, he could see Sarah Martinez approaching, manila envelope in hand. "They're being given a choice, sweetheart. Just like I promised. This isn't about punishment. It's about change." Sarah knocked softly before entering. "The union meeting just ended," she announced, pulling up a chair. "You'll want to hear this, Marcus. Peterson and Reynolds requested a private meeting with the Reform Committee." Sophie adjusted her hospital bed to sit up straighter, clearly invested in the story. Her father had always taught her that standing up to bullies meant more than just fighting back. It meant creating lasting change. After reviewing the evidence, Sarah continued, opening her envelope. "They've agreed to something unprecedented. Instead of resignation or termination, they volunteered to become part of the solution." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Explain." "They'll join the new training program as examples. Living case studies of how power can corrupt and why accountability matters. Their body camera footage, including last night's incident, will become part of the mandatory training for every officer in the department." Sarah paused, allowing the weight of this to sink in. "But here's the interesting part. It was their idea." Sophie's monitor beeped steadily as Marcus absorbed this information. Outside, a fresh layer of snow had begun to fall, covering the traces of last night's confrontation. Why the change of heart? Sarah pulled out a letter. "Peterson wrote this. He wants you to read it." She handed over a single page of handwritten text, The paper slightly crumpled as if it had been written and rewritten several times. Marcus read aloud for Sophie's benefit. Mr. Chen, last night I thought I was asserting authority, but I was only exposing my own weakness. Watching the footage in that conference room, seeing the pattern of our behavior through your company's analysis, I finally saw myself as others see me, as my children might see me. I don't want that to be my legacy. He paused, his voice catching slightly. Sophie reached for his hand, squeezing it gently, a gesture so like her mother's that it made his heart ache. There's more, Sarah added. The FBI liaison was impressed with your technology's ability to track pattern behavior. They're proposing a nationwide pilot program using TechFront's systems to identify and prevent similar incidents across the country. A knock at the door interrupted them. A nurse entered, followed by two unexpected visitors, Officers Peterson and Reynolds, both in civilian clothes, looking uncomfortable but determined. Mr. Chen, Peterson spoke first, his voice lacking its previous arrogance. We'd like to apologize to you and your daughter, and if you're serious about the reform program, we want to help make it work. Reynolds nodded, adding, We've been part of the problem for so long, we forgot how to be part of the solution. Maybe it's not too late to change that. Marcus looked at Sophie, seeing in her eyes the same compassion her mother had always shown. He thought about the choice before him. Simple retribution or lasting transformation. The path forward was clear. Gentlemen, he gestured to the chairs near Sophie's bed, let's talk about how we can turn last night's darkness into something that brings light to departments across the country. Because sometimes, he smiled at his daughter, the best revenge isn't getting even. It's making sure the story changes for everyone who comes after. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering both the old traces and the new possibilities emerging on this transformative day. Officer Peterson circled Marcus like a shark, his boots leaving aggressive tracks in the fresh snow. The night had been a disaster for the two officers. 3 hours earlier, they'd lost a high-profile suspect in a drug bust that the captain had personally assigned them. Now their careers hung by a thread, and here was this rich guy in his Tesla driving through a neighborhood where carjackings had become weekly occurrences. Spread your legs. Hands on the hood, Peterson commanded, a slight smirk playing at the corners of his mouth as Marcus's expensive Blazer collected snow on the frozen metal. The engine ticked as it cooled, each sound punctuating the humiliation of the moment. Marcus complied but reached slowly into his pocket. Officers, please look at this. It's my hospital visitor's badge. My daughter. Did I tell you to reach for anything? Reynolds barked, suddenly animated as he knocked Marcus's hand away from his pocket. The visitor's badge fell into the snow, the fluorescent orange, parent/guardian, label face up against the white ground. Neither officer moved to examine it. You know what I think? Peterson leaned in close, his coffee breath hot against Marcus's frozen ear. I think you're one of those entitled types. Think the rules don't apply to you because you drive a car that costs more than we make in a year. Marcus's phone buzzed again from inside the car, its glow illuminating the interior. Reynolds glanced at it, then back at Marcus with calculated indifference. Lot of calls for this time of night. Meeting up with someone. Maybe making a delivery. My 13-year-old daughter is in the hospital, Marcus said through gritted teeth, his patience wearing dangerously thin. She has a rare autoimmune condition, and those calls are from her doctors. I need tow. Oh, now it's from doctors. Peterson chuckled, exchanging a knowing look with Reynolds. Funny how everyone's got a sob story when they get pulled over. Next, you'll tell us you're some big shot CEO or something. The irony of his words hung in the frigid air, but Marcus remained silent. 20 years of building his tech empire had taught him when to speak and when to observe. He was doing plenty of observing now. Badge numbers, name tags, the dash cam angle on their patrol car, the way Peterson's body camera light blinked red despite department policy requiring it to be on during all civilian interactions. Reynolds moved closer, his boots crunching in the snow. Tell you what, we're feeling generous tonight. Maybe we can work something out. He paused for effect, enjoying the moment. Since you're so well dressed for a workout. 20 push-ups. Peterson cut in, his voice filled with mock cheerfulness. Right here, right now. Consider it your get-out-of-jail-free card. Marcus stared at the icy sidewalk, his mind racing. The hospital's number appeared on his car's display again, the call going straight to his Bluetooth system. A computerized voice echoed from inside. Call from Minneapolis General. Peterson reached in and killed the power. Clock's ticking, rich boy. Push-ups or a night in lockup. Your choice. The wind cut through Marcus's blazer as he looked at the frozen concrete. He thought of Sophie, alone in her hospital room, waiting for him. He thought of the 3 years he'd spent on the police oversight committee, the millions his company had pledged to modernize the department's technology. But mostly, he thought about how this moment, this humiliation, could become something much more significant. I'm waiting, Peterson sang, pulling out his personal phone to record. Unless you'd rather we search that fancy car of yours. Amazing what dogs can find, isn't it, Reynolds? Marcus got down on the ground, his palms burning against the ice. One, he began, his voice steady despite the cold. Above him, the officers' laughter echoed off empty buildings, but behind their cruel amusement, they had no idea they were counting down to their own downfall. The fluorescent lights of Minneapolis General's pediatric wing cast a harsh glow on Marcus's face as he sat beside Sophie's bed, his laptop balanced on his knees. It was 4:30 a.m. His daughter had finally drifted off to sleep, her fever reduced to manageable levels, but her father's night was far from over. You're sure about this timeline? Marcus spoke softly into his AirPod, mindful of Sophie's rest. On his screen, a video conference showed 4 faces. His company's head of security, 2 senior developers, and their chief legal counsel, Maria Rodriguez. Crystal clear, Maria responded, her voice tight with controlled anger. She'd known Marcus for 15 years, helped build Tech Front from the ground up. The dashcam footage shows them cutting their body cameras before approaching your vehicle. That's violation 1. The physical harassment, violation 2. Racial profiling, violation 3. And that's before we get to the forced exercise in dangerous weather conditions. The head of security, Dave Thompson, cleared his throat. Boss, you need to see this. A screen share popped up, showing a social media feed. Those videos the officers took. 3 different angles already online, posted by anonymous accounts. Comments are, well, people are outraged. Marcus glanced at Sophie, her small frame rising and falling with each breath. The IV drip beside her bed marked a steady rhythm, like a metronome counting down to morning. Take them down, he ordered. But sir, the public support. Take them down, Marcus repeated firmly. This isn't about viral videos or public shaming. Download copies for evidence, then use our social media cleanup protocols. I want them gone before dawn. Sarah Martinez's text lit up his phone. Emergency meeting called for 9 a.m. Full police commission will be present. You good to proceed? Marcus typed back a quick confirmation before turning to his developers. Show me the pattern analysis. His senior developer, Janet Wu, shared her screen. We've been running algorithms through the department's incident reports for the past 2 hours. Officers Peterson and Reynolds have a history. 27 complaints in the past year alone, all mysteriously dropped or buried in paperwork. But here's the interesting part. Their body cameras malfunctioned during 13 of those incidents. Cross-reference demographic data, Marcus instructed, an idea forming. Janet's fingers flew across her keyboard. Data points appeared, forming a clear and damning pattern of targeted harassment. But Marcus' attention was drawn to something else, a series of dates that coincided with the department's previous attempts at reform. Maria, he turned to his legal counsel. Remember that clause we inserted in the modernization contract? The one about personnel compliance. Maria's eyes widened with understanding. Section 7.3. Yes, it gives us the right to refuse service to any officer who demonstrates. Oh, that's brilliant, Marcus. Dad? Sophie's voice, weak but clear, interrupted the conversation. Marcus immediately muted his laptop. Hey, sweetheart, How are you feeling? Better. She managed a small smile. Were you on a work call at this time? Marcus squeezed her hand gently. Just preparing for a big meeting tomorrow. Remember how I told you that sometimes standing up to bullies isn't about fighting back, but about changing the system that lets them be bullies in the first place? Sophie nodded sleepily. Like Mom always said. Exactly like Mom always said. Marcus felt a familiar pang at the mention of his late wife. Get some rest, honey. Tomorrow's going to be an important day. As Sophie drifted back to sleep, Marcus unmuted his laptop. Janet, Dave, I want those pattern analyses refined and ready by 8 a.m. Maria, prepare the contract clause documentation. It's time we showed the department that true power isn't about force or humiliation. It's about accountability. Outside the hospital window, the first hints of dawn began to color the Minneapolis sky. In a few hours, Officers Peterson and Reynolds would walk into what they thought was a routine technology briefing. Instead, they'd face the consequences of their actions in a way they'd never expected, not with violence or vengeance, but with something far more devastating: systematic, irrefutable truth. The police department's main conference room buzzed with nervous energy at 8:55 a.m. Officers Peterson and Reynolds stood near the door, their uniforms freshly pressed, their faces betraying the confidence of men who believed their night's entertainment would stay buried like so many complaints before. Quite a turnout, Reynolds whispered to his partner, noting the unusual crowd. The police chief sat at the head of the long table, flanked by the mayor and 3 deputy commissioners. The entire city council had shown up, along with representatives from the police union. Even the local FBI liaison was present, though nobody seemed to know why. Sarah Martinez entered last, her heels clicking purposefully across the polished floor. She took her seat just as the wall-mounted screens flickered to life, displaying the Tech Front Solutions logo. The room fell silent. Good morning. Marcus's voice carried easily through the space as he stepped in, wearing the same blazer from last night. Snow stains still visible, a silent testament to what had transpired. Before we begin, I'd like to thank Officers Peterson and Reynolds for their memorable welcome to the neighborhood last night. The color drained from both officers' faces as Marcus gestured to the screens. The dashboard camera footage began playing, crystal clear despite the darkness. The audio was perfect, catching every taunt, every laugh, every moment of forced humiliation. What you're watching, Marcus continued, his voice steady, is footage from my vehicle's comprehensive security system. The same system we're contracted to install in every patrol car in this department. He paused as the video showed Reynolds kicking snow onto his hands. But this isn't about one incident. The screens split into multiple feeds, showing a pattern of similar stops. Dates, times, demographics, all meticulously cataloged. Our AI analysis identified 27 similar incidents in the past year alone. Notice anything interesting about the targeted individuals? The police chief leaned forward, his face darkening. The union representative began furiously scribbling notes. Peterson took a step toward the door, but Sarah Martinez's quiet voice stopped him. Please stay, officers. This concerns you directly. Marcus walked to the center of the room, commanding attention without raising his voice. Last night, while my 13-year-old daughter was fighting a dangerous fever in the hospital, these officers forced me to do push-ups on frozen concrete. They filmed it for their entertainment, posted it online, and thought it would disappear like all their other indiscretions. He turned to face the officers directly. But here's what they didn't know. Every phone in this department's network automatically backs up to our secure servers. Every deleted video, every malfunctioning body camera incident, it's all there, permanently archived, unalterable. The FBI liaison began taking notes as Marcus continued. Section 7.3 of our contract gives us the right to refuse service to any officer who demonstrates a pattern of misconduct. Without our technology integration, these officers would be effectively unable to perform their duties in any modern police force. Peterson finally found his voice, though it shook slightly. You can't do this. The union. has already seen the full evidence package. The union representative cut in, closing his notebook. We're not touching this one, Peterson. Marcus held up his phone, displaying the hospital's number. I need to take this, my daughter's doctor. But before I step out, know this. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because this department is about to change. Those who can't adapt will find themselves obsolete. The screen shifted to display a comprehensive reform proposal as Marcus walked to the door. He paused beside the ashen-faced officers. By the way, those push-ups. Poor form. You might want to work on that during your upcoming administrative leave. I hear there's plenty of time to exercise when you're suspended without pay. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving the room in stunned silence. Through the glass, he could see Sarah Martinez standing up, reform proposal in hand, ready to reshape the department that had harbored bullies for far too long. His phone buzzed again, Sophie's doctor with good news about her recovery. As he listened to the update, Marcus allowed himself a small smile. Sometimes justice wore a suit, carried a contract, and came armed with irrefutable digital evidence. The frozen concrete burned against Marcus's palms as he lowered himself for another push-up. 17 he counted, his breath forming clouds in the bitter air. His blazer had ridden up, exposing his lower back to the cutting wind. Above him, Officer Peterson's phone recorded every moment of his humiliation, the camera light a constant reminder of how this night would be remembered. Put your back into it, Reynolds called out, mock encouragement dripping from his voice. This is better than those fancy gym memberships you probably have, right? He high-fived Peterson, their laughter echoing off the empty storefronts. A car slowed as it passed, its headlights illuminating the scene. Marcus caught a glimpse of passengers holding up their phones, more witnesses to his degradation. The sound of their engine faded, replaced by the distinct buzz of his phone from inside the Tesla. The hospital was calling again, the 5th time in 15 minutes. 18, Marcus grunted, his arms trembling not from exhaustion, but from the rage building inside him. The ice beneath his hands had begun to melt from his body heat, making each push-up more precarious. His mind raced with images of Sophie, probably wondering why her father wasn't answering the hospital's calls. He thought of his late wife, how she'd always taught their daughter to stand up to bullies, though she'd never imagined the bullies would wear badges. I can't hear you. Peterson shouted, moving closer with his phone. What number was that? 18, Marcus repeated, louder this time, his voice steady despite the cold making his teeth chatter. His expensive watch scraped against the sidewalk, its face collecting scratches that would serve as permanent reminders of this night. Another car passed, this one honking briefly. The officers waved at it, enjoying their audience. Look at this, Reynolds, Peterson chuckled. We're going viral. Rich guy doing push-ups in the snow. Bet this'll get 1 million views by morning. 19, Marcus pressed on, his knuckles white against the frozen ground. His phone buzzed again, but this time it was different. 3 short vibrations. A text message. Emergency protocols of the hospital meant they'd only text if. He needed to finish this. Needed to get to Sophie. Almost there, big shot. Reynolds taunted, kicking some snow onto Marcus's hands. Make the last one count. Give us a good show for our followers. Marcus's arms tensed as he prepared for the final push-up. In his mind, he was already calculating his next moves. The dash cam footage he requests, the phone recordings, the time-stamped data from his hospital badge. Every humiliating second would become evidence, but not just against these 2 officers. This would expose something much deeper. 20, he exhaled, pushing himself up one last time. As he rose, his hand brushed against something in his blazer pocket, his company ID badge. It slipped out, landing face up in the snow between Officers Peterson and Reynolds. The laughter stopped abruptly. Peterson's phone lowered as he bent to pick up the badge, his flashlight beam illuminating the holographic logo of TechFront Solutions and Marcus' title, CEO and founder. Below that, in smaller text, lead contractor, Minneapolis Police Department Modernization Project. An uncomfortable silence fell over the scene. broken only by the sound of Marcus's phone buzzing inside his car. The emergency text message glowed on the screen. Mr. Chen, Sophie asking for you. Fever spiking. Please respond ASAP. Reynolds cleared his throat. Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding. No misunderstanding. Marcus cut him off, his voice ice cold as he stood to his full height. He brushed the snow from his ruined blazer, eyes locked on the officers' suddenly pale faces. Everything that happened here tonight was perfectly clear. And tomorrow. He glanced at their badge numbers one final time. Tomorrow will be even clearer.